The January 15th meeting of the Oklahoma City Water Utilities Trust will be in order. The first item on the agenda is the approval of minutes from the January 2nd meeting.
Move approval.
I have a motion and a second to approve the minutes of the January 2nd meeting. Are there comments, questions? Hearing none, voting please. Minutes are approved. Next item is a consent docket.
Move approval subject to individual considerations.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve the consent docket. Are there matters to be considered separately? Hearing none, voting please. Consent docket's approved. Next matter is the concurrence docket. There's two items.
Move the concurrence dockets to individual consideration.
Second.
A motion and a second to approve the concurrence docket. Are there matters to be considered separately? Hearing none, voting please. Concurrence docket's approved. Next item's items for individual consideration. The first item is a resolution concerning the adoption of an ordinance that relates to model aircraft permits.
Move approval.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve item 5A. Are there comments or presentation?
Staff had not planned a presentation at this time. Just briefly, we have model airplane clubs at both Lake Hafner and Lake Draper. The Baxter Flying Field Club has been visiting with us about their work at Draper Lake and suggested that fees would help them potentially recover some investments required to make that field go. The proposed fees are a total of $4.50 a day for children under 12, $8 for adults, and then there are yearly fees that are also very reasonable of $23 and $48 for children and adults. The flying clubs must comply with the Academy of Model Aeronautics standards, which are very stringent and very serious.
Is this just for Baxter Field at Draper?
This is just for the Draper Field. We are still in discussions with the Torx Club over at Hafner. We had a very nice meeting with them, and they're going to take a look at the issues. And they have some of the same concerns. A lot of what's sought to be codified are rules and safety regulations that are recommended by the American Model Airplane Association.
Okay. Have a motion and a second to approve. Are there further comments or discussion? Hearing none, voting please. 5A is approved. Next item is item 5B, resolution requesting the general manager to ratify the action of the general manager in approving a joint funding agreement with the U.S. Geological Survey.
Move approval.
Second.
Motion and a second to approve. Are there questions or comments? Hearing none, voting please. Item 5B is approved. The next item, item 5C, is a pipeline permit agreement between Oklahoma City and Casillas Petroleum.
Move approval.
Second.
A motion and a second to approve item 5C. Voting please. Item 5C is approved. Item 5D is a amended and restated lease agreement between the city and Quail Ridge Sporting Clays. There are a number of people here, I believe, signed up to speak on this matter. And before we do anything else, I think we probably ought to let the people that are here speak. The person on the top of my list is Kelly Work. Kelly, do you want to speak now, or do you want to speak at the last of all these? I believe are in, or many of them are at least in opposition to it. And I understand you're representing all
Yes, sir.
some of them.
Yeah, I'll be happy to go at this time.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. My name is Kelly Work, and I am representing a group of families who reside in the area to the north and west of the proposed location of the Quail Ridge shooting sports facility. They're proposed to be located at Southeast 119th and Air Depot. The persons that I am representing live to the north and some to the north and west, and I've got an exhibit that I'd like to provide. I have a couple of copies of an aerial photo that I'd like to, I'll hand one around and then I can hold one. What is displayed on this aerial photo is the proposed site there at the southeast corner of 119th and Air Depot is highlighted in yellow, and then you see the streets are labeled as well: Air Depot, Southeast 104th to the north, and then Southeast 119th that runs immediately north of the proposed location. And the persons who are opposing the proposed lease agreement to relocate this facility from Southeast 149th Street to this location at Southeast 119th Street live around this location, but predominantly to the north and west, you can see there are homes. There's homes on both sides of 104th Street that begin 3/4 of a mile to the north of the proposed location. And then a number of the persons who are here today, including some of my clients, live in the Meadow Lakes neighborhood that is here to the west, that begins at the half section line west of Air Depot and then runs over to Sooner Road. And we understand from the information that we've been able to gather since we became aware of this proposal to relocate the facility to this location, that it has become necessary for the facility to relocate from 149th Street there at the location between Midwest Boulevard and Air Depot because of the complaints and objections from the residents who live around that area to the noise that is generated from the shooting. It's just a shotgun shooting facility. And we understand that many of those complaints came from the Sterling Canyon neighborhood that is located to the west of Air Depot and south of 149th Street. So that neighborhood is about the same distance from the 149th Street location that these areas, these residential areas to the north, are from this proposed location at 119th. So our concern is that we are going to experience the same problems with noise that the residents of the around the 149th and Midwest Boulevard location have experienced. And so we're concerned that this relocation to this proposed site is not going to solve the problem, that it's just going to establish the problem with noise at a new location with a new group of residents. And we understand that there were efforts that were made at the former location or the existing location at Southeast 149th Street to lessen the noise impact, and that even after those efforts were made, I understand they made an effort to limit the hours, and there may have been other efforts as well, but that the complaints apparently continued to such an extent that the determination was made that the facility just could not continue to exist in that location and be compatible with the persons who live in that area. There is a large number of residents that live in this area, as I've pointed out, to the north and northwest of the 119th and Air Depot location that will be disturbed from noise if a shooting range is allowed to locate at this 119th site. This facility, as it has been described to us, will be a 6-day-a-week operation. When they have tournaments, and the applicant had supplied a list of the events that are scheduled through 2013, and for many of the events, they have 250, 300, 350 persons participating in a 3-day, 2 or 3-day tournament. So on those occasions, there will be literally thousands of rounds that will be fired, and our concern is that the noise level will not be tolerable, and then it's going to create a problem for this neighborhood as well. One of the concerns that we have is that the Oklahoma legislature has exempted shooting ranges from liability for noise, and I'd like to provide you with a copy of that statute. This was a statute that was adopted by the legislature in 1996, and it provides that no person shall bring any suit in law or equity or any other claim for relief against a shooting range or its owners or operators based upon noise emanating from the shooting range, provided the noise at the property line of the range does not exceed 150 decibels. Well, 150 decibels, based on the information that we've been able to gather, is the noise level that is at the point of the barrel of a 12-gauge shotgun. So it's unlikely that there would be a noise level that would be exceeding that at the property line from a shooting range. So the legislature has effectively provided that there is no remedy for noise complaints for shooting ranges. So if this facility is established at this location, then under Oklahoma law, these area residents would have no place to go for a remedy if there is a problem with noise, except, I suppose, to come back here. The Oklahoma City Planning Commission, I'm sure you all are aware of this, but I'd like to just provide copies for the record, has adopted the Oklahoma City Southeast Sector Plan, which addresses the West Elm Creek Reservoir area, and I'd like to just provide an excerpt from that plan. It has been adopted, of course, by the City Council, and just to bring to your attention some of the provisions that relate to the preservation of the West Elm Creek Reservoir. I won't go through all of those sections, but I've highlighted them. I've highlighted them for you. As you all are aware, the City of Oklahoma City in this plan has designated the West Elm Creek Reservoir as an environmental conservation area, and then there are directions under the area plan to the city as it makes its planning and zoning and development decisions, both for public and private projects, that the preservation of the West Elm Creek Reservoir area is paramount, and that the paramount on that list is the protection of the water quality in the area that is proposed for the reservoir. We would submit to you that this proposed operation, a shotgun shooting range established at this area within the West Elm Creek Reservoir reservation, would be incompatible with a proposed municipal water reservoir and would be inconsistent with these provisions of the Oklahoma City Southeast Sector Plan. Additionally, the residents of this area depend on and rely on groundwater for their drinking water. Many of these homes have relatively shallow wells that are maybe 150 feet, not too much deeper than that. And lead contamination is a risk for drinking water where private water wells are utilized in an area where lead has been deposited. And that's a concern that we have with respect to this proposed location. Lead is a toxin, and one report that we found that I'd also just like to provide, and I know there are other people that are interested in speaking, so I'll just provide you with this information, then I'll allow some of the others an opportunity to speak. But there was a report that has been prepared by the Environmental Working Group, which is a Washington, D.C. based nonprofit organization that is involved in research relating to toxic chemicals. And they did a research study that specifically addresses lead pollution at outdoor firing ranges, and I would just like to provide copies of that report. And again, I won't attempt to go through this in detail, but just to highlight some of the significant points that the Environmental Working Group found in this report. They note and point out that the United States military has been involved in massive lead cleanup efforts for years at the estimated 700 military firing ranges across the country. And what they're attempting to do in this report is to present, for the first time they indicate, estimates of anticipated lead pollution at commercial and private firing ranges. And their analysis shows that the shooting ranges are likely to be one of the biggest sources of lead pollution in the country. And they prepared some estimates, which they set out in their report, that show that even at modest levels of activity, a single firing range can become contaminated with tens of thousands of pounds of lead. And we did a calculation just based on the events that this applicant has scheduled for the upcoming year, and just based on a reasonable estimate of the amount of lead that would be deposited on the site, this site, if it were to be located here, would be measured in tons. So we're talking about a significant quantity over time of lead being deposited on this site that we submit to you is not going to be consistent with its future proposed use as a municipal reservoir. At figure 3, on page 3, the report notes that in just 2 years, a typical firing range can have lead contamination equivalent to a 5-acre Superfund site. They give an example, a range that has 15 customers each day, each of whom shoots 50 rounds or bullets, would create 100 pounds of lead pollution in 7.5 days, or 4,800 pounds of lead contamination in a year. The residents who live in this area would ask you all, as the trustees of the Water Trust, to give careful consideration to these issues, both the noise and the potential for a significant lead pollution problem at this site if it's allowed to be located here. And we suggest to you that another more appropriate location needs to be found for this facility. I'll let other persons have an opportunity to speak. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, trustees.
Thank you, Kelly. The next speaker is Colette Callum.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and trustees, for the opportunity to present my concerns about this move, and I've made a packet for each of you that has the documents.
Pass me. Thank you.
He's absent today.
Looking at the very first page as you open up your packet, this was an original map that was done by one of our residents that showed the proximity of the new location to the neighborhood Meadow Lakes Addition. And the very edge there is 0.76 miles. And on the very bottom part, the Sterling Canyon addition that complained relentlessly of the noise is 0.91 miles. So we are actually closer. The next page is a letter I wrote last Friday as quickly as I could to each of you, which you can read on your own. The sector plan, which I've just taken out certain pages and highlighted them for you, where it specifically states that the purpose of the Elm Creek Reserve is for a nature reserve, for an environmental purpose, and for a water reservoir for the future use of Oklahoma City. And it'd take me a long time to go through each point, but I highlighted it for you to read so that you can understand that this is not in compliance with what the sector plan states, as Mr. Works talked about. I think he gave you this lead pollution and outdoor firing range. It's quite significant, and this also will corroborate with what Mr. Works said about the amount and quantities and the danger of the lead toxicity. Also in your packet is a story from a prior man that was very, very active in a shooting club in Vermont. And one day he was hunting, and he got a duck, and he opened the duck up, and inside the duck was a huge pile of lead that the duck had consumed. And he could not believe it. And he started on this long campaign, which took him 16 years to show the EPA and the gun club how they were polluting the water and the environment and having an effect on the wildlife. It's pretty profound, and it's quite a story of the tenacity of this man. It took him 16 years of collecting data to finally get them to listen. And I hope that we don't get to that point. That is basically what I have. It's more for you to look at, other than to say that I went over and talked to some of the neighbors on the current location, and they told me it is like the 4th of July. The noise, and they live farther than I do, and some of the other neighbors around my area. I think a noise study was done, and it said that the noise of wind shear, it was done by the Water Trust, was louder than the noise you'd hear from the shotguns. But the noise of wind, and also they suggested that the animals make more noise than the gunshots at a distance. But the noise of the wind shear and the noise of the animals is what we want to hear. To hear a boom, 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 boom for a tournament that would last 2 days with 300 participants shooting 100 rounds per day is not the same as hearing the wind or the birds or the coyotes howl. And that's the case I wanted to make. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. The next person signed up is Joan or Joanne Filkins.
Thank you, sir. My name is Joanne Filkins, and I just simply want to say we bought our property out there 35 years ago, and my husband and I are not spring chickens anymore, and we have so enjoyed the peace and the quiet of our area, and everyone that comes says this is a wonderful place, and it's so quiet, it's so wonderful, and all of that would be destroyed. And we couldn't go in our backyard and sit there and listen to the birds and the coyotes and enjoy the quality of life that we have had for 35 years. Thank you.
Carolyn Pimster. I'm sorry, I should have asked you to, all the speakers, to state your name and your address before, just for the record. I've got it here.
Sure. Okay. Carolyn
From now
Pimsler.
on, we need to-
My address is 10712 Southeast Side Drive. I live in the Meadow Lakes community, just northwest of the proposed shooting range. I've kind of calculated the number of noises that we would hear based upon what Mr. Martin submitted would be the number of people participating in at least 13 of his tournaments. Next year we would, or this year I guess we would conceivably hear 210,000 plus shots going off. Since 1991, the use of lead shot has been prohibited by hunters for hunting of waterfowl in the entire United States. Waterfowl are particularly susceptible to lead poisoning because they eat gravel, they eat particles from off the ground, grind it up, and digest it if they can. But they can't digest lead, and they are very susceptible to lead poisoning. The reason for the 1991 rule was because of that, was because it is so dangerous for waterfowl. Oklahoma is a major migration corridor for all kinds of waterfowl, including the bald eagles. 2 weeks ago, I counted 60 ducks on our pond. We had, at the same time, a blue heron. We have a pair of lesser green herons that live there. We had 4 different kinds of ducks on the pond. That's not unusual. In 2011, a news piece by the Tulsa CBS affiliate reported on Oklahoma's eagles being poisoned by lead. And the story indicated that lead shot is toxic and works its way up the food chain. It can be seen in the eagle's digestive tract. The veterinarian at the Tulsa Zoo, who treats eagles there, Dr. Bacchus, stated that lead is a very toxic metal. It ends up in the GI tract from being on the ground and from the bottoms of ponds. It's ingested by birds, usually by birds that are preyed upon by larger species like eagles. The area we live in, although not officially designated as a wetlands, in the square mile we live in, there are 23 ponds and a lake, Kitchen Lake. The reason it hasn't been designated as a wetland is because you have to have someone come out and make that designation. Based upon Mr. Martin's tournament schedule for 2013, with each participant shooting 100 shots, I calculated 8.47 tons of lead will be deposited in 2013. Using the same calculations at the 149th site, he's already deposited over 13 tons of lead. He says he will abide by EPA regulations, and the sad truth is that there are no EPA regulations regarding shooting ranges. The EPA has published a best practice guideline, a manual, and I actually spoke with one of the authors of that manual. It recommends locations, frequency, and types of lead removal attempts, but it is not required. This is strictly a voluntary effort, and shooting ranges do not have to clean up their lead at all based on EPA regulations. The only time the EPA steps in is when a shooting range is abandoned or closed down, which means the 149th site becomes a topic. If someone calls the EPA after the 149th site is closed down and requests evaluation, that site would be tested, the soil, the water, and it could eventually be declared either a hazardous waste site or a Superfund site. At that point, somebody's got to clean it up. There's no information in the new lease agreement or the old lease agreement that says that Mr. Martin has to clean up the waste. Once the site is closed, once a shooting site is closed, the lead left there is considered hazardous waste, but like I said, it's not declared a hazardous waste site. The 1991 federal law outlawed shot in wetlands for hunters. Who would ever think that they would need to outlaw a shooting range in a wetland? The writers probably never even thought anybody would do something like that. I don't know of any duck hunter that is bad enough that he requires 100 shots in a half day to shoot his ducks. I'm just saying that the lead deposited by hunting is minuscule compared to the lead that is going to be deposited into our migratory pathway by this shooting range.
Thank you. The next item is Sarah Baxter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and trustees.
Will you give me state your name and address?
Sorry.
I'm sorry, I should have started that at the very beginning.
My name is Sarah Baxter. I live at 11008 Southeast Side Drive, and I'm in the Meadow Lakes Addition.
Okay.
I've copied the amended and restated lease agreement that you all have before you to approve today. It's quite lengthy, and I know that you all have put a lot of time, or someone has put a lot of time into it. But I found one part very interesting. It's Section 1.06, relocation costs and expenses. It says the city and the Oklahoma City Water Utility Trust recognize that due to the relocation of the facility, the lessee will incur costs and expenses, and that there's been an agreement that the lessee will pay these costs and expenses and then submit a claim to you all to approve to be reimbursed for that amount. And to me, the amount is very staggering. The amount is not to exceed $116,855 that the City of Oklahoma City and the Water Utilities Trust is going to reimburse Mr. Martin for relocating to an area closer than the area where it's at now. And quite frankly, I'm against guns, the noise of guns, and I can guarantee that if there's a lot of noise out there in the way of gunshots, you will have a lot of other illegals out there shooting, because we'll have wildlife out there and they will be hunting, and they will say that, well, we already heard guns out there, so we can shoot out there too. And I guarantee you that will happen. But anyway, that amount was quite a large sum. The other thing, some of the neighbors have talked to different companies on the reclamation of the lead. They say that there's only 75% to 95% cleanup if they're asked to clean up the lead, which would never make that area suitable for a water reservoir or any type of water. for the future of Oklahoma City. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Roger Harlan.
My name is Roger Harlan. I live at 10712 Eastside Drive in the Meadow Lakes Edition. It seems to me that the average citizen, that the responsibility of the Water Resources Trust is to ensure that Oklahoma City has pure, clean water, not just for drinking, but for boating, fishing, and other forms of recreation. To attain this goal, you must be good stewards of the land near the water, which is also home to many types of wildlife. It appears to be highly irresponsible to allow, not only to allow, but to facilitate the deposition of toxic material measured annually in tonnage to a site that was acquired by the city for the sole purpose of water reservoir, actually acquired by eminent domain to ensure that Oklahoma City had enough water for the future. Lead, gold, silver, platinum, and all metals exist in nature as a very dilute ore form, usually underground. This form is what all living creatures, including humans, have been exposed to for millions of years. Then in recent history, enter the human, who mines it, refines it to its concentrated form, and then puts it into products in which we can all be exposed. Over the millennia, humans, animals, and especially birds have developed no resistance to metal toxicity. Lead, as in shot from shotguns, is a very soft metal. The softer the metal, the more toxic. Lead is exceeded in its poisonous properties only by the even softer metal, mercury. Lead has been removed from our paint, our gasoline, and most products that it was ever in. However, it's very difficult to remove lead from the ground. It's best just not to put it there in the first place. It seems that it would be very difficult for this trust to justify deposition of tons of toxic waste onto land that was acquired for the sole purpose of a water supply to the citizenry of Oklahoma City, when today it could be avoided altogether by denying the lease to Mr. Martin. Why is the city government so intense on boosting Mr. Martin's Quail Ridge shooting business? He's simply a businessman engaged in private enterprise. He already has land offered by the city, but is being forced to leave. Now they are trying to put the same noxious business in our neighborhood. Why can't he do business like everyone else, as a private enterprise, lease or buy land from the private sector, and like all other businesses, hang out their shingle and practice their trade? If he does business in an honorable fashion, he should flourish. Simply, if he builds it, they will come, all without favors from the government. A simple solution exists. Deny this lease, have Mr. Martin operate entirely in the private sector without government assistance. This solution leaves hundreds of the citizenry happy and only one person disappointed, an obstacle he should be able to overcome. I'm prepared to field any of your questions on the effects of heavy metals or noise in birds or animals during this inquiry or after. Thank you.
Thank you. The last person that signed up is Judy Culp.
Thank you. My name is Judy Culp. I live at 6101 South Miracle Way, which is also in the same estate as the prior person. I don't have a lot to say other than I really hope that you don't let this go through. I don't have a lot to leave my children and grandchildren. I have 2.5 acres with a half-acre pond that we have ducks and geese nonstop and the cranes, and I would like to leave them something that's not going to be contaminated. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any comments by trustees or staff? I have a couple of questions. The question about lead removal. You know, we went into a lot of discussion. We had a lot of discussion about lead removal. It is obvious that the contract does not, the lease does not require it. There's not a specific clause that says it has to be removed. I mean, we've talked about how it would be done. We've talked about different vendors that do it. We've talked about best practices, but no language in the lease that would that would require it. I think that's a valid concern. At this point, I don't have any reason to think he wouldn't, but that's not good business based on what I think.
Mr. Chairman, we've been presented a lot of information in today's meeting, and I was wondering if we would have some time to review it before we reach a decision. I don't want to rush into anything, and I want to make sure we get a chance to.
I think
go
that's
through
probably
this.
going to be in order, but if we're to the extent we have a lot of people here that came down to talk and be heard, and if there are comments from any of the trustees or any staff, I couldn't agree with you more. That we probably need to take it all under consideration.
Yeah.
But we've got a lot of folks here that that we ought to. There is another consideration that I noticed in one of the submissions. An individual said they couldn't hear it from where they were. Well, one of the reasons and that's one of the reasons we're moving it, is because where it is fired directly in the direction of people that are within earshot of it. So what we looked for was a site that we could change the direction of fire, so that as a way to mitigate the sound. And I think this site accomplishes that very well. I'm not saying there won't be any sound, but it's not illegally loud where it is. And I'm not talking about the law that your attorney brought up, which is kind of ridiculous. But I don't mean it's ridiculous for him to bring it up, but I believe it's kind of a ridiculous law. But we tested the other site based on the sound levels for residential property at the far south edge of the site, and it was below those sound levels. Now, I don't want to say that that's not disruptive. I don't mean that. But in terms of its legal sound limitations, the existing site is well under it. What really created the problem is that the existing site, again, as I'm being redundant, but it fires directly to the south where the people that are complaining live. This site will fire most to the east, and I suspect that it can fire exclusively to the east. Perhaps at one end of it might have to fire slightly north-northeast, but it would not fire straight north at all, nor would it fire northwest at all. And so the sound is going to be mitigated substantially. I don't have any. I'm not telling you won't hear it, but I'm telling you it will not be the same impact as it is where it presently exists. I'm confident of that, because we learned something by that site. We learned that the direction of fire was improper. We should not have permitted that site, not because of it's too close to people, but because the direction of fire makes that site doesn't work. So that's. I mean, a lot of the things that we've heard today, we've spent a lot of time working through. I mean, this is not something that's been done easily, and the change of the site was not done easily. It took a year to locate a site that we felt, given there's 7,000 acres there. In that whole area, we found only 2 sites in that area that we thought met the criteria that Tinker established, and that the sound engineers told us would be better. So this isn't like a spur-of-the-moment thing that just came up. I mean, it's been that part of it's been well vetted. I saw somebody raise their hand, but I can't take questions from the audience. If you want to say something else, just come forward and give us your name again and talk again.
Thank you, Mr.
It's all
Chairman.
put on tape, so I need you
Yes.
talking to that microphone.
Colette Callum, 6124 Panda Way. I'm in the Meadow Lakes edition. I guess I can stand this up a little bit. In your packet, I included this clay target shooting guide, and it talks specifically about what you're talking about. In the summertime, we have prevailing winds going from the south to the north, which will carry that sound toward the neighborhood. And that's, if you read through this document that I gave you, and I've got them highlighted, some of those issues.
I have heard the existing location. I live at Southeast 134th and Henney, which is 8 or 9 miles from the existing location. I have heard it, but only when wind is directly out of the east. Only then. And that's only been one occasion I've heard it.
And the wind, I'm
So
sorry.
when the wind blows directly at you, I don't have any question that you would hear it. But this location, given prevailing winds and given direction of fire and the sound that emanates from the direction of fire, is a much better location. I'm not telling you you're going to like it. Don't misunderstand me. But I don't know how it's going to. I don't know how the vote's going to go either. But it has not. This was not randomly picked. This location was not picked at random. It was picked to minimize the sound part of it.
I understand, and I think everyone's tried, and I don't think there's any malice on anybody's part here. We just want to make sure that you understand the position and the part that we've looked into. And the point about the south winds, all through the summer, most of the wind comes from the south, and that will be directly toward our neighborhood. And there's some other considerations in this this clay target shooting information that I gave you about selecting a site and not having it near an urban area or residence. Thank you.
Thank you. I understand we're going to have a meeting after the council meeting today and try to talk about some of these things. Is that your understanding, Mr. Work?
I've been informed of that, yes.
Okay. We have some conflicting timelines that have to do with matters of being on the city council agenda and a lease termination that was given to the business before, which may have to be worked out. And we do not have another water trust meeting until February
The 5th.
the 5th. I'm just trying to think of how we can accommodate that request, which I don't think is at all unreasonable, but I'm trying to fit it in with the time constraints that we're under. Ms. Slaughter, I talked to you earlier about the possibility of extending the termination notice for a week or 10 days or something in order to accommodate this.
Yes, sir.
Now, that notice came from the trust, and it is effective February 28th, I believe.
That's correct.
So we'll have 2 more trust meetings between now and then, and it could be put on a trust agenda.
It could.
I'm looking at the possibility of also there being a continuance on the council agenda, but I guess those could be accommodated at the same time if that happens. I don't want to get in a situation where we're in one of those things where we're making decisions because we don't have any more time. I mean, we have to make it today because it's the last day to make it. I want to give everybody an opportunity to talk, and I want to have an opportunity to look over the materials. I'm trying to find a way to accommodate that.
Staff will assist you in any way we can to make that situation work out. I did want to also mention that there's been a lot of information presented about lead and its impacts on the environment. The question you asked is whether the document adequately protects. I never recommend a document that I don't think is the right thing to do. Having looked through the document, it certainly can be strengthened.
I didn't mean you hadn't tried.
No,
it wasn't your best effort. Don't take that personal. I think that's a valid point. I think it's a valid point. We discussed at length, and I've listened to the guy that runs Martin talk at length about what he intends to do. But good intentions we may need to. In fact, if we go forward, we need to ice that down. And there's another meeting that he has scheduled to understand sometime later in the month before the city council meeting. So we're trying to make sure we have an opportunity to listen to everybody and have an opportunity to do it. I will tell you that I don't believe there's anybody on this trust that would vote to do something that they had the slightest concern would impact the water supply. I mean, we live and die by that. That's what we do. One of the things, and I'll quit preaching here and go to meddling, but one of the things I'm most proud of is what's happened in Oklahoma City in the last 50 years with regard to protection of our water supply. We are so well situated in relation to cities that are not located on flowing streams. We're probably the best situated city in the United States that's not situated on a free-flowing stream, and we guard that very jealously. I think all of us are very concerned about that. So, I think here's what I'd like to, and you can help me. What I'd like to do is entertain a motion to continue the matter, but I'd like the possibility that if we can work things out, we could have a special meeting of the trust which would only take 3 of us if we all were in agreement, that we could have a special meeting of the trust and not take everything else out of line because, this may take it all out of line and just continue it to February the 5th. That may be enough. But if things can be worked out before then, I'd like to see if there's a way to do that. Is there some, Mr. Keith, you can probably answer that question.
Could we move to defer it to the next meeting, whenever that might be?
Whenever that meeting might be. It won't be later than February 5th. Will that work?
Given that we don't know the time of the meeting, to continue it would make it difficult for people who are on notice to know when the next meeting is. Okay. We have some other procedures we can utilize.
Yeah. We can defer this item to a date certain. If you knew when you wanted a special meeting, this item could be deferred to that date certain. Or it can be deferred to
there can be a no action today, and it can be put on a special agenda, unmoved, but we just don't want to have an indefinite continuance because it doesn't put the public in a position to know when that meeting will be.
Right. And I don't want to do that. We have all these people here, and I think whatever we do, they need to know. And if they want to come and speak again, they have an opportunity to do that with whatever side.
And should there be a special meeting, it would be on the OKC.web site where you can all easily access it.
I tell you, given I think we have kind of a consensus that we would hold a special meeting if, in fact, things got worked out, and that we have kind of a consensus without taking a vote, that we have kind of consensus that we would probably instruct the general manager of the trust to extend the termination deadline if that became necessary. I would entertain a motion to just continue it to February the 5th, and we'll just see what happens. That's the next trust meeting. That's the most logical place to do it.
Mr. Chairman, if we do that, then it will have to be on the February 5th agenda.
Right
now, you want to either strike it from this agenda, and then you call a special meeting and you put it on that agenda.
Well, here's what I'm thinking, is if we all of the consensus is that if we needed to extend the Quail Ridge lease for another 10 days or 2 weeks to accommodate a hearing of this on the 5th, then I think we ought to just set it on the 5th and go on. Why? I'm willing to listen.
We can strike it from today's agenda. The general manager will have the ability to either put it on a special meeting agenda or on the 5th.
Okay.
We're just cautioning against continuing it. If you continue to a specific date, then it will have to be on that date in order to complete the action.
Then Mr. Chairman, let me move to strike this item from today's agenda, subject to
With the understanding that this general manager may be placing it on the special agenda.
Assuming the discussions continue and we make progress, then we can do it. Otherwise, it'll come back up on our next, I'm assuming as a member, it'll come up on our the
Given
February
what we
5th.
talked about today, I would rather, and I would hope we do it on the 5th, and rather than having to...
Well, the way to give us the
Because we have so
maximum
many people
flexibility
who
is to
wouldn't get
strike it,
notice.
then
No matter
I
what we planned, they would not get notice of it
I move to strike.
if we don't strike it or set it on a date certain, one of the two.
Right.
Just continuing it with the idea that maybe we'd set it on a special meeting, I think is not going to be good. It's not going to work. I mean, I think that's fair to people that might want to talk about it. So we have a motion to strike the item. Do you have a second? Have a motion and a second. That was a second, Mr. Clay? Okay. Motion and a second to strike the item. Voting, please. Item stricken. Those of you that want to sit in on a conversation about it, we'll have it someplace big enough where as many people that want to come can listen. The next item is enter into executive session concerning the water litigation with the tribes, and I understand we do not need executive session. Is that right?
That's correct, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Have a motion to
Motion to strike be in order? I so move.
Have a motion and a second to strike. Voting, please. That matter is stricken. Next item, matters from trustees. Mr. Graves?
No, sir, nothing today.
No, sir. I have nothing. I have a comment on the drought response plan, but we can wait until that. Next is the general manager reports. First is the status report from the utilities department.
Mr. Chairman, just briefly, the status report describes both lake levels, which are low, as we'll discuss in a minute, but also new customer connections, which are up about 30% over, 38% over this time last year. So if you thought there was a housing boom, in fact there is. It's a mini boom. It's exciting.
Those are primarily residential connections?
Yes. There's just a typical blend of sizes of meters.
Right. That's interesting. It's a leading indicator.
Okay. Next item is a drought response action plan.
Mr. Chairman, we're having a drought. I think that's pretty well described in the news media, and I don't in any way want to lessen the concern. In town, our lakes are at about 50%, a little over 50% total fullness. We have more in the southeast lakes where we're pumping. We've made good progress to start increasing the volume of water that's in Lake Draper. We're in better shape at Lake Draper this year than the same time last year. Again, catching up from the repairs we made on the pipeline that took the pipeline out of service for about 8 months over a 3-year period. Sort of the bottom line, what I would like to do is, and I have discussed this with the chairman who did visit about this with the city council this morning. What I want to do is go ahead and reinforce odd even outdoor watering now in a very strong way while we prepare for additional options for water use cutbacks that will help us through the drought period. And that today it appears while we're on an odd even 3 times a week potential watering program, the drought is severe enough we may need to get to a once-a-week watering program with some additional kinds of curtailments. You saw Norman announce some very complex watering restrictions. Recently, I believe we craft our own program. I want to bring you some options at your next meeting. There's some other options for you. These are all policy discussions. What's been very important to us as we go forward is to make certain that we have a constancy of message for our customers so that we know that they understand and can participate with us in this unusual weather condition that we do all hope ends, but the spring forecast is just not good for rainfall.
Mike, I talked about this a little bit at City Council today. My concern is that we not react to this situation specifically, but we react to the overall situation that we see years in the future, that at least for the forecastable future, there's no real relief in sight. And that we adopt a water conservation policy as opposed to a rationing, but we just adopt a citywide water conservation policy that goes 24/7, 365. I mean, it's just a change in the way we permit people to use water. Anybody that has a Bermuda grass lawn knows they can survive a day without water. And I just think we've got to be, I think we have an ethical, moral responsibility to the places we take the water from, that is Canton and from Atoka, McGee Creek, Sardis area, that we're being good stewards of the water once it gets here. And I don't think we have any choice but to do it myself. It's not because we don't have the water. The water's there, and it's not because we don't have a legal right to the water. It seems to me we have a moral obligation to be better stewards of the water that we have the legal right to. There are other uses for it. I don't think we're well served by continuing to run pictures of sailboats, because that's not what the lake is for. But that what it is, it is. That was the picture that was sent out. But I don't think that does us any good at Canton when they send us the water we're asking for, it will reduce Lake Canton to 3 puddles. There will be 3 separate, unconnected pools of water in the lake bed at Canton when that happens. I think we're completely within the law to do that. But I think we've got to be respectful of what the impact that has on those people at Western Oklahoma, that their only value in that water is really the recreational use of it. So we've got to, and that's a big deal. I think the recreational use at Hefner's a big deal, but it's not the deal. The deal is to have the water to drink and use for industrial purposes. And so I'm all in favor of a more or less permanent conservation. I don't think we ought to call it a rationing system. I just think
you can always raise prices. Always raise prices.
Well, we might need to do that also. In that regard, I would like to see when we do the next bond issue, that we not commit 100% of the revenue from the water bonds to infrastructure drinkable water, that we factor out 1/10 of 1% or 2/10 of 1% to use for the other purposes. That the way it is now, 100% of all our water revenues are obligated to go toward infrastructure and the production of drinking water. There isn't any reason that we could not. I don't know the number. I don't have a decimal, but that we could have enough that we could create a fund to have internally, not have to rely on oil and gas revenues and shooting clay revenues and off ATV revenues and fishing licenses or whatever, to put the kind of amenities at the lakes that we'd all like to see there, and I think the public would like to see them there too. I think we could just change the bond the next time we do bonds. I'm saying 99% or 99.99, but there is a decimal there that would provide. We need to figure out how much money we'd like to have it provide every year, but there is a decimal there that we could use, and then we could act accordingly. The idea we just have to grope for every dollar to try to do the things to make the lakes better from a recreational standpoint, to me, is we could do better than that. That's all I'm saying. We could, but that's to be done when we do the next bonds, which I understand is not far away, right? You might think about that. Okay. Any other matters to come before the trust? Oh, I'm sorry. We have another item. Citizens to be heard. No one else has signed up. Anybody else want to speak? Okay. Hearing none.